My son-in-law mocked me as a plumber on a yacht. Then I said, "It's mine." He laughed at me in front of my own daughter, sneering that plumbers had no place on a luxury yacht. He thought I was a poor retiree showing off a rental I could never afford. But I stayed silent, watching, waiting for the right moment. Because what he didn't know was that every inch of that yacht already belonged to me. And when I finally spoke the truth, the look on his face was something I will never forget. Stay with me, because what happened next shocked everyone at that table. I stood on the dock that morning with my hands shoved deep into my jacket pockets, staring at the boat rocking gently in its slip. The sun was already high enough to scatter the water with sparks of light, but all I felt was a restless thumping in my chest. I had invited my daughter Emily and her husband Kyle for what I had called a family day on a rented yacht. That was the story I told them, at least. In truth, every detail of this day had been carefully planned. Every hour leading up to this moment marked on my calendar like a countdown. I had imagined Emily smiling the way she used to when she was little, when we would fish off the pier and she would tug at my sleeve, begging me to let her reel in the line. I thought maybe out here, with the salt air clearing her head, she might remember who her father was before life and marriage pulled her away. I thought maybe the boat could give us back something we had lost. I heard their footsteps before I saw them. Kyle's voice carried over the water first, casual but sharp, as if every word he spoke was an audition for superiority. Then Emily appeared beside him, her hair tucked neatly behind her ears, her arm looped through his like she was hanging on for balance. She gave me a small smile that looked more like a polite nod than the embrace of a daughter. Kyle stepped onto the deck with a smirk already forming. His polished shoes clicked against the teak boards, and he glanced around with a face that blended curiosity with disdain. When he noticed the faucet at the galley sink dripping, I bent down with a wrench to tighten it. It was a simple fix, the sort of thing any man could do without thought, but the moment the tool touched metal, Kyle laughed. "Well, look at that," he said loud enough for the dockhands nearby to hear. "Every yacht needs its plumber. Good thing you're here, Tom." He didn't say Dad. He never did. He stretched my name out like it was a joke, and Emily laughed a little too quickly, though her eyes darted away from mine. I wanted to snap at him, to tell him right there and then that he was standing on something he didn't understand, but instead I just tightened the fitting until the drip stopped and rose slowly to my feet. I met his eyes, steady and unflinching, and said only, "A working faucet keeps the whole boat afloat." It was the kind of simple phrase my wife Linda used to whisper when life tested us. Practical, unshakable. He chuckled like I was speaking nonsense. Inside my chest a storm was already forming, but I held it down. Let him laugh. Let him believe he was the clever one, the successful one. Soon enough, truth would do the talking for me. Emily touched my arm gently and asked if I was ready to set out. I nodded, forcing a smile, and helped her step aboard. Her hand lingered in mine a second longer than usual, like she wanted to say something but couldn't. I felt the distance between us more sharply than the salt in the air. As Kyle strutted across the deck, making comments about the chrome fixtures and the leather seating, I kept my hands behind my back. Every insult he threw, every dismissive glance, I stored quietly inside me. Not for revenge, not for anger's sake, but because I knew there would come a moment when those very words would weigh heavier than he could bear. The boat rocked gently, ready to pull away from the slip, and the gulls circled above us, their cries sharp and restless. I looked once more at my daughter, then at the man she had chosen, and I whispered silently to myself, "Patience, Thomas. Today they will learn." What they didn't know was that the yacht wasn't borrowed, it wasn't rented, and it wasn't anyone else's pride and joy. It was mine. And before the sun set over Annapolis Harbor, they would see me in a light they had never allowed themselves to imagine. That thought carried me forward as I untied the lines. My jaw was tight, my chest heavy, but my resolve clear. They thought they were stepping into a harmless weekend cruise. They were stepping into a lesson. A lesson about respect, about gratitude, and about the danger of underestimating the man who raised the very woman standing by their side. I told myself I would keep calm, keep silent for now, but my mind had already set the course. This day would not end the way Kyle thought. The harbor spread out before us like a living painting, masts swaying gently against the clear May sky. Blue flags snapped in the breeze, their edges frayed from 100 days of salt and wind. Brass cleats and bells caught the sunlight, scattering flashes across the water like coins tossed by unseen hands. The smell of diesel mixed with the sweeter scent of seaweed drying on rocks, a combination I had always associated with freedom. Boats of every shape drifted in and out, their wakes folding into one another before dissolving into calm again. As I stood on deck with Emily and Kyle behind me, I let my eyes travel across the marina. Families moved along the docks, children laughing as they balanced on weathered planks, men in faded baseball caps checking lines, women holding cups of coffee and chatting as if the tide itself had slowed for them. Ordinary people, ordinary moments, yet to me they all seemed like reminders of the life I had wanted for my daughter. I wanted her laughter here, not buried beneath Kyle's constant criticisms. I wanted her to breathe in the salt air and remember what joy felt like without someone correcting her every move. Captain Morales passed by on the dock, his cap tilted back, and gave me a knowing nod. He had overseen the slip assignments for years and had seen me fuss over this boat since the day it arrived. He did not say a word, but his eyes held something steady, as though he understood that today was about more than a weekend outing. I nodded back and tightened my grip on the railing. Kyle had already made himself busy with commentary. He ran his fingers along the wheel, examined the compass as if he had studied navigation, and laughed at the polished chrome like it was an overdone decoration. "Quite the showpiece," he said. "I wonder how much the rental company charges for upkeep. Probably a fortune just to keep the wood from rotting." Emily gave him a quiet nudge, her smile tight, but she said nothing. The gangway creaked as Robert and Elaine arrived. They were Kyle's parents, older, quieter, their voices carrying the calm rhythm of people who had worked hard all their lives and knew what mattered. Elaine touched the hull gently as she stepped aboard, admiring the lines of the boat, and Robert's eyes lingered on the brass bell near the bow. He let out a low whistle and said, "Beautiful craft, Thomas." I thanked him softly. Their presence steadied me like anchors set in firm ground. Inside me, memories stirred. I remembered when Linda and I would walk harbors together, her pointing at boats she loved, her laughter echoing across the water. She would have adored this one. She would have seen beyond the leather seats and chrome, into the quiet strength of the hull, the promise of journeys yet to come. I felt her absence as keenly as the wind pressing against my collar. Kyle's voice broke the moment. He crouched near the seating area and tapped the cushion with his manicured finger. "Butter soft leather," he smirked. "For a weekend rental, they sure went all out. Tom, how in the world did you swing this? Retirement checks must stretch farther than I thought." His laughter rang sharp. Emily's cheeks flushed and she turned away, fixing her gaze on the water as though it might swallow the sound. I held my silence, though inside I felt the storm building. I looked out beyond the marina, where the open bay spread wide and endless. The water shimmered like a road leading somewhere better, somewhere cleaner than the space I occupied now, with Kyle's smirk biting at my ears. I told myself again to wait, to be patient. The harbor had its rhythm, the tide its timing, and so did truth. Above us, a gull circled once, its cry harsh and insistent, then disappeared into the sky. I watched it vanish and felt something shift in me. This day was not just about a boat ride. It was about direction, about charting a course when the compass in your heart pointed away from where your loved ones thought you belonged. I turned back toward the group. Emily was smoothing her dress nervously, Robert was running his hand along the polished rail, and Elaine was gazing out at the other boats with a soft smile. Kyle, meanwhile, was still prowling like he owned the deck, commenting on everything within reach. I placed my hand on the wheel, steadying myself. The brass fittings around me glowed in the afternoon light, and I thought to myself that brass does not bend to mockery. It shines best when the fire is hottest. As the lines were released, and the boat drifted free, The marina seemed to hold its breath. The blue flags fluttered wildly, the brass bell at the bow caught another flash of sunlight, and the horizon beyond beckoned. My heart hammered once more, not with fear now, but with certainty. Whatever happened next, this day was moving toward revelation, and no tide in the world could hold it back. The gangway shuddered under Kyle's weight as he strode across it like a man entering a stage. He carried himself with the kind of swagger that demands attention even when no one is looking. His chin tilted just high enough to signal authority, his loafers gleaming as if the marina itself had been waiting for his arrival. I watched him step onto the deck and pause, as though he were taking possession of something he believed was his by right. Emily followed behind him, lighter on her feet, careful with her step, as if she did not trust the boards beneath her. She clutched her small purse tight against her side, her eyes darting around the boat with the same nervousness I had seen when she was a child about to meet her teacher on the first day of school. Except this time, her unease came not from fear of strangers, but from the constant weight of Kyle's presence. He spread his arms wide, as if presenting the yacht to invisible cameras, and then turned to me with a grin that held no warmth. "Tommy," he said, dragging my name out in a tone that stripped it of any respect. "Quite the setup. I suppose even retirees need their toys. Better than miniature golf, I'll give you that." He laughed at his own line and glanced at Emily, waiting for her to echo him. She gave a small laugh, brittle and brief, then lowered her eyes. I wanted to reach for her, to tell her she did not need to laugh at every one of his jokes, but I stayed silent. She was caught in a game of status that Kyle played every waking moment, and I was his favorite target. Robert and Elaine were slower to cross. Robert kept his hand lightly on the rail, his gaze steady, while Elaine paused to watch the water ripple below. When they joined us on deck, they spoke with quiet admiration about the craftsmanship, their words carrying a weight that felt like balance in a room already leaning too far toward mockery. But Kyle did not notice. He prowled around the seating area, lifting cushions, opening storage compartments, handling controls with a flourish. "Now this," he said, tapping the navigation panel with the back of his knuckles, "this is the kind of thing that separates amateurs from real seamen. Shame it's wasted on a rental." He looked at me as he said it, his eyebrows lifted as if daring me to contradict him. Emily placed a hand on his arm, her voice soft. "Kyle, maybe we should just enjoy the day." He brushed her hand aside gently, but with finality. "Sweetheart, I'm making conversation. We should be practical about these things. Your dad has a history of questionable decisions when it comes to money. We wouldn't want him getting in too deep." His words cut through me, each one heavy with condescension, yet he spoke them with the air of a man delivering sound advice. I drew a slow breath, holding it in my chest as I watched Emily's reaction. She bit her lip and looked at me with an expression that almost asked forgiveness, as though she could apologize for him without speaking. I gave her a small nod, the kind a father gives a child to let her know he is still steady even when the storm is near. Kyle stepped toward the bow, calling out to Robert as if leading a tour. "Imagine the cost of dock fees on this beauty. Thousands every month, no doubt. That's the kind of expense you only take on if you're trying to play a role. Right, Tom?" He turned to me again, his smile sharp. "Tell me, do you get a discount for seniors?" His laughter carried across the deck and out toward the water where it dissolved into the wind. I clenched my hands behind my back, the same way I had done countless times in boardrooms when men younger and louder tried to undermine me. It was an old posture of patience, a signal to myself that silence can be stronger than words. The game was clear now. Every step he took on the deck, every word he spoke, was a move to assert himself above me. He was crossing more than a gangway, he was crossing into a battlefield of pride, and Emily, caught between us, was forced into the role of referee when all she wanted was peace. I turned my gaze to the horizon where the bay opened wide and endless. The wind filled the flags, the brass fittings glowed, and the water shimmered like a path waiting for me. Let him play his games, I thought. Let him believe the crown sits on his head. The tide has its own way of humbling those who mistake arrogance for strength. I tightened my grip on the wheel and waited. The day was only beginning, and the lesson was far from delivered. The steps leading down into the cabin creaked softly beneath our feet, the kind of sound that carries the weight of old wood even when everything else is polished to perfection. I had spent weeks making sure the interior was arranged just right. The dining table gleamed under warm light, the cushions were plumped, and photographs of quiet coastlines hung on the walls to remind me of the journeys I still planned to take. I wanted them to feel welcome, to see that this was more than a boat. It was a place meant for family, a place where voices could soften and laughter could return. Elaine stepped in first, her hand trailing lightly along the banister as if she were tracing a story in the wood. She looked around with wide eyes and whispered to no one in particular, "It's lovely." Robert followed, nodding with appreciation at the craftsmanship. "That walnut finish is something you don't see often," he said, his voice low but firm. I felt gratitude stir in my chest. At least someone noticed more than the shine. Emily was next. She entered carefully, as though she were walking into a room that might reveal too much. She glanced at the polished fixtures, the framed photo of a lighthouse I had chosen for the far wall, and then at me. Her lips curled in a faint smile, though her eyes betrayed the unease that had lived there since she married Kyle. She looked like she wanted to be impressed, but didn't dare show it too strongly. And then Kyle came in, the air shifting with him. He moved through the cabin like a man inspecting merchandise, opening cupboards, running his fingers along the counter, peering into the galley as if searching for flaws. His smile was wide, almost too wide, the kind that hides sharpness behind it. He tapped the marble countertop and let out a laugh. "Well, isn't this cute?" he said. "A weekend castle for a king without a kingdom." He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at Emily, his eyes daring her to laugh with him. She gave a small smile, quick and nervous, then looked down at her hands. The cut was invisible to anyone else, but I felt it land deep inside me. Smile, smile, cut. That was how Kyle operated. He wore charm like a mask, but every word, every gesture was a blade looking for flesh, and too often Emily bled silently beside him. Elaine tried to shift the mood. She walked to the dining table, touched the edge with her fingertips, and said, "This is remarkable, Thomas. You've gone to such effort." Her kindness felt like a balm. Robert agreed, nodding as he studied the joinery with the practiced eye of a man who knew quality. I thanked them both, though my voice was quieter than I intended. Kyle was already at the built-in bar, pulling bottles from their places, reading labels out loud. "Premium brands," he announced. "Must have cost a fortune for the weekend." "You do know, Tom, they don't refund unused bottles, right?" He laughed again, pouring himself a small glass without asking. He lifted it like a toast, but didn't bother to direct it toward anyone. Emily shifted uncomfortably, glancing at me as though she expected me to object. I said nothing. I simply watched him and stored the moment away. Every insult, every careless remark, was another notch in a ledger I had been keeping silently for years. The room itself seemed to feel the weight of it. The polished surfaces reflected light, but the air grew tense, tight enough that even the hum of the refrigerator sounded louder than usual. I looked at Emily again. She was twisting her purse strap in her hands, her shoulders pulled slightly inward. She looked like a woman caught between loyalty to her father and fear of her husband's disdain. I wanted to reach across that space and remind her of who she used to be. The girl who would race me to the end of the pier. The young woman who hugged me with both arms when she got into college. But now she stood beside a man who whittled her spirit down with smiles that always ended in cuts. Robert cleared his throat and said, "Thomas, I have to say, this cabin is extraordinary. You've chosen well." I nodded, grateful for his steadiness. Elaine smiled warmly and added, "Yes, it feels like a home." Her words filled the silence that Kyle's mockery had carved out. But even as they spoke, I could feel Kyle's eyes on me, measuring, judging, waiting for the next chance to land another cut. I let my gaze drift to the polished compass mounted near the helm. Its needle stayed true, pointing north, steady and unwavering no matter how much the boat shifted. I thought of Linda then, her voice in my memories saying, "Stay your course, Thomas. Don't let them push you off it." Oh. So I stood quietly, absorbing the sting of Kyle's words, watching my daughter's nervous smile, listening to the kindness of his parents, and reminding myself of the truth that waited to be revealed. The cabin was filled with light, yet shadows lingered in the corners. Smile, smile, cut. The game had only just begun, and I was patient enough to let it play out. 2 months before that day on the harbor, I had stood in a quiet showroom that smelled faintly of waxed wood and salt air. The place was all glass and polished surfaces, the kind of room where the lights reflected off chrome rails and made you feel like you were already out at sea. I had put on my best navy sport coat, the one Linda had always liked, the one I kept pressed in the back of the closet for the moments that truly mattered. My palms were damp even though the air conditioning whispered cool around me. The salesman, a young man named Trevor with a voice trained to be both warm and persuasive, walked me through the details again. He pointed at the galley counters, at the state-of-the-art navigation system, at the way the cabins had been designed to feel less like bunks and more like small apartments. He spoke in measured tones about financing options, but I already knew I would not be signing a loan. In the inside pocket of my jacket was a check written in steady pen strokes, numbers so large they felt unreal even to me. I walked slowly across the deck of the Harbor Grace, letting my hands slide along the brass compass mounted near the helm. The needle stayed steady, pointing north no matter how I turned. For a moment I closed my eyes and imagined Emily standing there beside me, laughing as she once did, her hair caught by the wind. I imagined her smile unburdened, free of Kyle's sharp remarks. I imagined her saying thank you without fear. Trevor continued his explanation, talking about warranties and service packages. His words floated around me like background music. What held me steady was the picture in my mind. Emily had once told me, on her birthday in February, that she missed the days when we would take the old skiff out on the bay. She said it casually, maybe without realizing how deep her words cut, but I carried them with me. I thought about how tired she had looked when she said it, the lines around her eyes that shouldn't be there yet, the weight of a marriage that drained her more than it gave. That was the moment the idea took root. Linda's life insurance had been sitting untouched for years. I had guarded it carefully, not for myself, but for something that mattered. I wanted to spend it on more than bills or home repairs. I wanted it to be a gift that carried her memory forward. Linda had always said that real wealth is who you bring along, not what you keep. So I decided I would use it to bring my daughter back to me, to remind her of who she was before the world told her she was less. Trevor placed the folder on the counter, sliding the contract toward me. His pen gleamed in the light. "Mr. Hale," he said, "you can take her home today if you'd like." I looked at the paper, then at the boat, then at the photograph of Linda. I kept tucked in my wallet. I thought of her laugh, of her hand resting on mine during long drives, of the way she always believed I could build anything if I put my mind to it. I took the pen, steady despite the tremor I felt inside, and signed each line with deliberate strokes. With every signature, the dream grew heavier, more real. When the last page was done, I reached into my jacket and placed the check on the counter. Trevor's eyes widened for just a second before he smoothed his expression into professional calm. "Full payment," he said quietly. "Congratulations, Mr. Hale." He shook my hand with both of his, and for a moment I felt almost giddy, like a boy who had managed to keep a secret from the whole world. As he handed me the keys, 2 small pieces of metal resting cool in my palm, I felt something shift inside me. This was no longer just a purchase. It was a promise. A promise to Emily that her father still believed in family, that I had not stopped trying to bridge the distance that had grown between us. I left the showroom that afternoon with the late sun burning across the parking lot, the keys heavy in my pocket. The drive home was quiet, but my mind was alive with visions of how the reveal would go. I would tell them it was a rental at first, let them enjoy the comfort without fear of cost, and then at the perfect moment I would tell Emily the truth. I imagined the tears in her eyes, the gratitude in her voice, maybe even a rare silence from Kyle when he realized what kind of man he had underestimated. I parked in front of my modest house, the same one I had lived in for decades, the paint peeling a little on the porch, the garden needing trimming. I looked at it and smiled because none of it mattered. Inside me was a secret as vast as the bay, a plan that I believed would bring my daughter back. I touched the keys again before slipping them into the drawer beside Linda's picture. "We're going to do this, love," I whispered. "For Emily, for us." Also, I set the table the way Linda would have wanted. Each plate lined up perfectly, silver polished until it caught the light, glasses placed just so. I had chosen the menu with care, simple but thoughtful, food that spoke of effort rather than extravagance. Lemon herb salmon, roasted vegetables, a loaf of bread warm from the oven, and a bottle of white wine that had been waiting in my cupboard for just such a moment. I wanted the meal to feel like Sunday dinner at home, the kind where conversation mattered more than presentation, but I also wanted them to see that I had spared no thought in making it special. As I laid the last fork beside Emily's plate, I paused and let my eyes travel across the table. Everything gleamed, everything felt ready, but my hands trembled slightly as I adjusted a napkin. It wasn't the food or the table that unsettled me. It was the silence hanging between us all since we had stepped aboard. It was Kyle's voice filling every pause with remarks sharp enough to slice the air. I hoped that once we sat down together, once the rhythm of eating began, maybe the mood would soften. Emily entered first. She glanced at the table and gave me a small nod. "It looks beautiful, Dad," she said softly. Her voice carried a trace of warmth, but there was also hesitation, as if she were afraid Kyle might twist even her kindness into something else. I wanted to tell her she didn't need to hold back, that I was still her father and could bear anything she offered, but I only smiled and pulled out her chair. Robert and Elaine followed, both of them pausing to admire the spread. "Thomas," Elaine said, her hand brushing my arm, "this is lovely. You've gone to such trouble." Robert nodded in agreement, his eyes scanning the table with the practiced appreciation of a man who valued detail. Their words steadied me. They reminded me that not everyone aboard was waiting to laugh. And then Kyle appeared. He stood by the bar, lifting a bottle of scotch I had placed there more for show than for drinking, examining the label with a smirk. "Premium stuff," he said. "I'm impressed, Tom. Rental companies don't usually go this far." "I guess you splurged for the deluxe package." He poured himself a splash without asking, swirled it in the glass, and took a sip with exaggerated satisfaction. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her cheeks flushed pink. I invited everyone to sit. Elaine folded her napkin neatly across her lap. Robert leaned back with an approving smile, and Emily perched lightly on her seat as though she might flee at any moment. Kyle remained standing for a while, running his fingers along the edge of the built-in bar, making remarks about the cost of the bottles, the brand of the wine glasses, the kind of wood in the cabinetry. Each comment dripped with mock admiration, a smile followed by a cut, the same pattern he always used. When he finally sat down, he clapped his hands together mockingly. "Lunch on the yacht," he said. "Living the dream, shame it's just for a weekend." His laughter rang out, filling the space where I wanted only the clink of cutlery and the soft murmur of conversation. Robert's frown deepened slightly. Elaine's eyes dropped to her plate, and Emily looked at me with the same apology she had carried all morning. I served the salmon carefully, placing each plate before them as though I were presenting an offering. The aroma filled the cabin, lemon and dill rising above the tension, reminding me of summers long ago when Linda and I would cook together in our small kitchen. I thought of how she would have handled this moment, her gentle way of turning sharpness into silence with nothing more than a smile. I tried to summon her steadiness, to let it flow through my hands as I poured the wine and passed the bread. The first few bites were quiet. Elaine complimented the fish. Robert nodded in agreement, and Emily whispered that it was delicious. Their words should have warmed me, but Kyle leaned back in his chair with a grin. "When you've got all day and nothing else to do, I guess you can practice cooking," he said. "Retirement must be nice." He cut into a salmon with deliberate care, as if the act itself was a statement of control. The fork trembled slightly in my hand, but I steadied it before anyone could notice. I reminded myself that patience was strength, that silence could sometimes be sharper than anger. I looked around the table, at the people I had gathered, at the faces that told me more than their words. Robert's jaw was tight with unspoken disapproval. Elaine busied herself with her napkin to hide her discomfort. Emily's shoulders were hunched as though she were bracing for more. And Kyle, always Kyle, smiling with satisfaction, as if the cuts he delivered were victories. I sipped the wine, letting it coat my tongue before I swallowed. I told myself to endure, to hold steady. The meal I had set like Sunday best had not softened him. Instead, it had only given him more ways to wound. Still, I kept my voice even and asked if anyone wanted more bread. The table glowed with light from the cabin windows, the food rich with flavor. Yet under it all was a shadow that spread wider with every word Kyle spoke. I held my silence, held my patience, but inside me a decision was hardening. I knew this day would not end with salmon and wine. It would end with truth, and when it came, it would cut deeper than any of his smiles ever could. After lunch, I began gathering the plates, stacking them carefully in the galley sink. The air inside the cabin was warm with the scent of roasted vegetables and wine, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe the meal had cooled the tension. Elaine was complimenting Emily on her dress, Robert was asking about the harbor, and even Emily seemed a little more relaxed. Kyle leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed, a smile on his lips that did not reach his eyes. When I suggested coffee on the deck, everyone agreed quickly. Elaine said she would love the breeze. Robert stood to help her up the stairs, and Emily followed close behind them. Kyle lingered, swirling the last of his scotch before announcing, "I'll clean up for you, Tom. Least I can do." His words were smooth, offered with a grin that seemed rehearsed. Emily gave him a small smile, relieved perhaps that he was showing manners at last, and then climbed the steps to join her parents-in-law. The moment the hatch closed and their voices drifted away above us, his expression changed. The grin slid off his face and left behind something colder. He set the glass down with deliberate care, then walked into the galley where I had been standing just minutes before. I watched from the salon doorway as he bent over the faucet, his movements too purposeful for a man simply tidying up. He pulled something from his pocket, a small wrench he must have brought with him. My stomach tightened as I realized he had come prepared. He twisted the handle of the faucet once, testing it, then gave it a sharp wrench. The sound was sickening, a grinding shriek of metal against metal. He pressed harder, bracing his hand against the counter, twisting until I heard a faint crack inside the valve. Water hissed briefly, then began to drip in an uneven rhythm. Kyle stepped back, watching the stream as though he had accomplished something worth pride. He grabbed a dish towel, wiped the chrome base where the tool had left scratches, and tossed the towel aside carelessly. His smile returned, this time with satisfaction. He looked not like a man doing a favor, but like a child who had just broken a toy to prove it was never worth much. I remained silent in the shadows, my fists clenched at my sides. Rage burned in me, hot and sudden, but I forced myself to stay still. Confronting him then would have led only to denial and mockery. I knew men like him, men who broke things to make themselves feel larger. They twisted truth the same way they twisted metal, always leaving someone else to deal with the damage. He turned the faucet again, letting the water run fast and uncontrolled. Then, with a look of mock concern fixed firmly on his face, he shut it off halfway, making sure it would drip loudly. He muttered under his breath, "Old boat problems," and chuckled to himself. He left the wrench on the counter for a moment, then seemed to think better of it, and slipped it back into his pocket before heading toward the stairs. I stepped into the galley after he had gone, the air still heavy with the echo of what he had done. The faucet dripped steadily, each drop hitting the sink like a ticking clock. I ran my hand along the chrome and felt the fresh grooves cut deep into the metal. My reflection wavered in the scratched surface, broken into pieces by his sabotage. I stood there for a long moment, breathing slowly until the anger settled into something harder, colder. I thought of all the times I had fixed problems for Emily and Kyle. Their broken refrigerator, their overdue car payment, their shortfall at the wedding, their down payment on the house. Every time I had stepped in quietly, repaired what was broken, written checks, provided solutions. And now here was Kyle again, creating damage not from need but from spite. I turned off the water completely, tightened the valve just enough to stop the worst of the drip, and folded the towel neatly on the counter. My hands moved with precision, calm on the outside even while my mind seethed inside. He thought he had written the story of this afternoon, a story where the old man rented more than he could handle and the equipment failed under his care. But I was already planning another ending. Above me I heard his voice, bright and falsely cheerful, joining the others on deck. "Everything's fine down there," he called, his tone dripping with concern he did not feel. I let out a long breath and wiped my hands clean. He believed he had scored his point, that the yacht was another stage for his games. He did not know I had already decided to play mine. I looked around the galley once more, the scratches gleaming like fresh wounds, the towel folded like a bandage that could never heal them. Then I straightened, placed both hands on the counter, and whispered quietly into the silence, "You've just made the gravest mistake of your life." I fetched the tool roll from the locker, the same kit I had carried with me for years, neatly arranged wrenches, spare washers, marine-grade sealants, every piece in its place. My hands moved without thought as I laid them out on the galley counter, a surgeon preparing for an operation. The faucet still dripped, slow and mocking, each drop another reminder of what Kyle had done. I steadied myself with a long breath before kneeling down, the wrench cool and solid in my palm. As I worked the fittings loose, memories rose uninvited. Each twist of the wrench carried with it a number, a dollar amount, a sacrifice I had made for Emily and by extension for him. I remembered writing the check for her graduate school tuition, $40,000 over 2 years, telling her she should chase her ambitions without fear of debt. I had been proud, so proud, even when Kyle barely looked up from his phone to mutter thanks. I eased the faucet stem free, laying the damaged piece on the towel, its metal bent and scarred by deliberate force. My mind moved to the wedding, the $25,000 I had contributed so Emily could have the reception she dreamed of. I remembered the flowers, the band, the photographs that captured her smile that day, the one time I thought maybe Kyle truly loved her. He had shaken my hand then with practiced warmth, saying, "You made this possible, sir." But his eyes had already been elsewhere, already calculating what else he could draw from me. The wrench clicked against the brass fitting, and I adjusted the pressure carefully. Another memory came, the down payment on their house. $60,000. I had given it without hesitation, telling myself that stability was what every young couple needed. Kyle had promised me then that he would never forget it, that he would make me proud. Now here I was, kneeling on my own boat, repairing damage he had done out of spite. I reached for the rag, wiping away small shavings of metal, the sound of fabric against chrome a soft counterpoint to the storm inside my head. I remembered the emergencies, $5,000 for their car repairs, $3,000 for Emily's medical bills when insurance didn't cover it, countless smaller gifts at Christmas, birthdays, anniversaries. The ledger was long, and I had kept it quietly, never reminding them, never asking for repayment. I had believed gratitude would grow naturally. Instead, entitlement had. I pressed the new gasket into place, threading it carefully, making sure it would seat firmly this time. The fitting slid back together with a satisfying click. I thought of Linda then, her voice echoing in my memory. She had warned me once that giving too freely without expectation can sometimes teach people to take without thought. "Thomas," she had said, "generosity must be met with respect, or it isn't generosity anymore. It's just fuel for greed." I had brushed her off then, believing love alone would carry the lesson. Now I knew she had been right. The faucet was nearly whole again. I tightened the last nut with slow precision, the metal warming under my hand, as if it too understood the weight of this moment. I tested the handle, turning it gently. Water flowed smooth and steady, then stopped cleanly when I closed it. No drip, no grind. Better than before. I wiped the chrome clean with the rag, erasing the scars as best I could, though faint scratches still caught the light like old wounds that never quite fade. I folded the rag and set it aside, my eyes on the neat line of tools. The act of fixing had steadied me, given me clarity. This was not just a faucet, it was a mirror of my years with Kyle. I had poured time, money, and patience into holding things together, into smoothing over cracks he created. But unlike this faucet, people do not always come back stronger. Some grow weaker with every repair, until all they know is how to break what others will fix. Above me I heard laughter, Emily's voice light but uncertain, Kyle's tone loud and controlling. The sound reached me like distant thunder. I gathered the tools slowly, each piece slipping back into its place, the roll folding tight in my hands. I felt calm, calmer than I had all day. Because as much as Kyle thought he had humiliated me, he had revealed something far more important. He had shown me his true character, stripped of polish and pretense. I placed the tool roll back in the locker and stood, wiping my hands on the rag one final time. The galley gleamed, the faucet stood firm, and my mind was settled. Kyle believed he had turned the story against me. But in truth, he had given me every reason to finish the lesson I had begun. The ledger was full, the debts recorded in silence. And today, for the first time, the balance would no longer fall on me. The navigation room was tucked behind the main cabin, a narrow space lined with panels of polished wood and humming electronics. Most of the family never even knew it was there. I closed the door softly behind me and let the low light of the monitors fill the room. Blue and white screens blinked to life with a quiet hum, 8 feeds in perfect clarity, each angle of the yacht captured in silence. I had insisted on the system when I bought the boat, telling the installer it was for security against theft. But I had known deep down it might serve a purpose closer to home. I sat in the leather chair, the cool air of the small room brushing against my face, and began to scroll through the recordings. My hands moved with practiced calm, though my chest tightened as the timestamp slid backward. 3:50 in the afternoon. I tapped the screen and there he was, Kyle, stepping into the galley with that same swagger he wore like a uniform. At first he moved like a curious guest, opening cabinets, looking at the fixtures. But then his eyes shifted, checking the doorway, confirming he was alone. My jaw clenched as I watched him pull the wrench from his pocket, test the faucet, then wrench it violently until the metal screamed. The camera shook slightly from the force. He grunted with satisfaction when the water began to spray, then set about wiping away the evidence like a craftsman of sabotage. I leaned closer, my reflection pale in the glow of the screen. Each detail was undeniable. The way his mouth curled in a private smile, the deliberate way he braced his foot for leverage, the quick glance over his shoulder before smearing the towel across the chrome. This was not clumsiness. This was intent. For a moment I felt rage flare hot and sharp. My hand hovered over the playback controls, ready to march upstairs and slam the truth down on the table in front of everyone. But I stopped. Years in business had taught me that evidence without timing is just noise. Proof is only as powerful as the moment it is revealed. I copied the footage to a small drive and slipped it into my pocket. It felt heavier than it should, like the weight of all the years I had carried them, all the sacrifices I had made, all condensed into one piece of metal and plastic. I sat back in the chair, the hum of the monitor steady in the room, and let the anger bleed away into something colder. I thought of Emily. I thought of her sitting upstairs, twisting her hands in her lap, torn between the man she married and the father who had raised her. What would it do to her to see the footage? Would it free her or break her further? I thought of Robert and Elaine, their quiet dignity, their shame at the way their son carried himself. I thought of Linda, her voice still alive in me, telling me once that mercy can be sharper than punishment if it shows someone exactly who they are. The room was silent except for the steady tick of the clock and the faint buzz of the electronics. I closed my eyes and breathed in the cool air. Mercy. I whispered to myself. Not forgiveness, not yet, but mercy in choosing how the truth would come to light. I powered down the monitors, leaving the room in darkness. The screens went black one by one until only my faint reflection remained in the glass. A man who had given, a man who had been mocked, a man who now held the power of evidence in his pocket. I touched the drive again, its edges pressing into my palm, and I felt a steadiness I had not felt in years. I opened the door quietly and stepped back into the cabin. From above, I heard Kyle's voice carrying down, cheerful now, full of false warmth as he told a story to the others. His laughter echoed through the yacht, confident and smug. He had no idea. He believed the damage was hidden, believed the story was his to control. I walked slowly back toward the galley, pausing to rest my hand on the polished rail. I whispered to Linda as if she were beside me, "I will choose the moment. I will choose the place, and when the truth comes, it will not just punish him. It will free her." The yacht rocked gently, the brass compass catching the light once more as if pointing me forward. I pocketed the rag I had left behind, my hands clean now, my mind clear. Above me, Kyle laughed again, and I smiled in the darkness, knowing the tide had already turned. The sun had begun to sink low over the harbor when I asked everyone to join me in the salon. Golden light filtered through the windows, spilling across the mahogany table I had polished until it shone like glass. The air inside was warm and heavy, thick with the scent of wine and lemon from lunch, yet beneath it all I could feel the tension pressing down like a hand on my chest. My decision had been made hours earlier in the quiet of the navigation room. Now it was time. Elaine entered first, her cardigan draped softly across her shoulders. She paused at the table, running her fingertips along the edge with quiet admiration. Robert followed close behind, his eyes sharp, his mouth set in a line that spoke of questions waiting to be asked. Emily trailed after them, her hands twisting nervously together, her eyes flicking from me to the floor as though she already sensed something was coming. And finally Kyle arrived, his grin wide, his step confident, his voice filling the space before he even sat down. "Well, what's this?" he said, gesturing at the chairs I had drawn neatly around the table. "A family meeting? Are we going to discuss rental insurance now, Tom? Because I have a few concerns about the plumbing." He laughed at his own joke, the sound sharp against the quiet of the room. Emily's cheeks flushed red, Robert's frown deepened, and Elaine lowered her gaze to her folded hands. I let his laughter fade before speaking. My voice was calm, almost gentle. "There is something we need to talk about. It concerns what happened in the galley this afternoon." Kyle leaned back in his chair, his grin never wavering. "Oh, that. Yeah. Shame about the faucet. Old boats, you know, they don't hold up. Must be tough renting something past its prime." He looked around as if expecting a chuckle of agreement, but none came. Emily stared at him, her lips parted as though she wanted to speak but couldn't. Robert shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. I reached into my pocket and set the small drive on the table. The metal caught the last of the sunlight, gleaming faintly between us. "This yacht has a security system," I said, still keeping my voice steady. "High-definition cameras in every room. Installed last month for safety. They record everything, every word, every action." The room fell silent. Even the water lapping against the hull seemed to hush. Kyle's grin faltered, just for an instant, before snapping back into place. He shrugged. "Well then, you'll see what I told you." I washed my hands, faucet didn't work, end of story. I tapped the drive once with my finger. "That's not what the cameras showed." Elaine gasped softly. Robert leaned forward, his hands clenched together on the table. Emily's eyes filled with confusion, darting between her husband and me. "Dad," she whispered, "what are you saying?" I looked at her, then back at Kyle. "I'm saying he deliberately damaged the faucet." He came prepared, with a wrench in his pocket. He twisted it until the valve broke, then wiped the evidence away. I have every second of it recorded. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Elaine whispered, "My God." Robert's face hardened, the disappointment in his eyes like steel. Kyle let out a laugh, too loud, too sharp. This is ridiculous. You're accusing me of what, vandalism? On a rental boat? You're making a mountain out of a molehill, Tom. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. Number, I am showing you exactly who you are. For the first time since we stepped aboard, his confidence cracked. The grin slipped, his eyes narrowed, and his jaw clenched. You think you can embarrass me in front of my family? He said, his voice low now, trembling with anger. Robert spoke then, his tone firm, controlled. Embarrass yourself is what you've done, son. If this is true, if you did this on purpose, you've crossed a line I cannot defend. Elaine's eyes were wet, her voice breaking as she added, Kyle, how could you? How could you do this to Thomas after everything? Emily sat frozen, her face pale, her eyes glassy with disbelief. She turned to her husband, whispering his name, searching his face for denial, for any shred of the man she had once trusted. But he stayed silent, his eyes locked on mine, his expression now stripped bare of charm. I let the silence stretch, heavy and unyielding. Then I spoke softly, almost a whisper. This yacht was meant to be a gift for Emily and for you. I wanted to surprise you today, to tell you it was yours. But now you've shown me who you are, and the gift is gone. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Emily gasped. Elaine covered her mouth with both hands. Robert shook his head slowly in disbelief. Kyle's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing like he had forgotten how to form words. Outside, the last light of the sun caught the brass compass near the helm, the needle glowing steady and true. Inside, the salon was filled with silence, the kind that comes only when truth has been laid bare and there is no escaping it. I sat back in my chair, folded my hands calmly, and let the weight of the moment settle over us all. The confrontation had come, not with shouting, not with violence, but with evidence and silence, and it had cut deeper than any anger ever could. The salon glowed with the last amber light of the day. It poured in through the windows, gilding the edges of the table I had set so carefully and catching the rim of the wine glasses. Outside the water was calm, the bay stretching wide and endless, but inside the air was heavy, thick with words unsaid. I asked them all to sit. My voice was even, but there was steel underneath. Elaine settled in first, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes darting from me to Kyle. Robert took his place beside her, his expression guarded, the look of a man who suspected unpleasant truths were coming. Emily lowered herself slowly into her chair, her fingers twisting in the strap of her purse as if it were an anchor. Kyle strolled in last, his confidence filling the room before he did. He clapped his hands together once, grinning as though this were nothing more than a game. So what's this, Tom? He asked. Family council on how to split the bill for the rental? I'm guessing they charge extra when the plumbing breaks down. He let the words hang, his smile sharp, his laughter quick and hollow. I placed the small drive on the table, the metal catching the light like a spark. This yacht is fitted with a full security system, I said quietly. 8 cameras, audio too. They see everything, and this afternoon they saw you. The room went still. Elaine's breath caught, Robert's brows drew together, and Emily looked up suddenly, her face pale. Kyle leaned back in his chair, his smirk faltering for a heartbeat before returning. Then you'll see what I already told you, he said. I washed my hands, faucet didn't work, end of story. Old boats, old problems. That's what you get with rentals. I kept my eyes on him. Number, the footage shows you pulling a wrench from your pocket, shows you twisting that faucet until it cracked. Shows you wiping the evidence away with a towel. That wasn't an accident. That was sabotage. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Elaine let out a soft cry and whispered his name. Robert leaned forward, his fists clenched on the table. Kyle's laugh burst out too loud, too sharp. You're out of your mind. You think I came on board just to break a faucet? Why would I do that? I leaned forward, my hands flat against the polished wood. Because you wanted me embarrassed. You wanted me small in front of my daughter and your parents. You wanted to prove I didn't belong here. For the first time his smile slipped. The grin softened into a sneer. His voice dropped lower, harder. You think you can humiliate me with some video trick? You're just an old man renting a dream you can't afford. Robert's voice cut through then, firm and heavy. Enough. If this is true, if you did what he says, you've disgraced not just yourself but all of us. Elaine shook her head slowly, her eyes filling with tears. Kyle, how could you do this to Thomas after everything he has given? Emily turned toward her husband, searching his face. Her voice cracked when she spoke. Tell me it isn't true. Tell me you didn't. But Kyle said nothing, only stared at me, his jaw working, his eyes narrowing into something colder than denial. I let the silence stretch until it weighed on all of them. Then I spoke softly, but each word was deliberate. This yacht was never a rental. I bought it 2 months ago, outright. It was meant to be a gift to Emily and to you. I wanted this day to be a surprise, a beginning of something better. But what you chose to do has ended it before it could start. The gift is withdrawn. The words landed with a finality that made the room tremble. Emily gasped again, her eyes wide, tears forming. Elaine covered her mouth with both hands. Robert sat back slowly, shaking his head. And Kyle, for once, was silent. His face drained of color. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came. The brass compass near the helm caught the last beam of sunlight, its needle steady, pointing north as always. I looked at it and felt a calm certainty settle in me. The confrontation was done, not with raised voices or anger, but with evidence and truth, and that truth had cut deeper than any insult ever could. I folded my hands in front of me, steady now, and let the silence speak louder than anything I might have added. The silence stretched across the salon until it seemed even the waves outside had stopped their rhythm. Kyle sat rigid in his chair, his grin long gone, his eyes darting between me and the small drive still resting on the table. Emily's breath came shallow, her lips parted as though she had forgotten how to close them. Elaine dabbed her eyes with a folded napkin, her hands trembling. Robert leaned back slowly, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on his son with disappointment that felt like a verdict. I let the quiet press on him for another moment before I spoke. My voice was calm, but I made sure each word landed like a weight. It's not a rental, Kyle. His head jerked toward me, his face pale. What did you say? I repeated it, steady and clear. This yacht is mine, paid in full, every penny in cash. It was never rented. I let you believe that because I wanted you to enjoy it without worrying about cost. But the truth is this boat belongs to me. The room seemed to shrink as the words settled. Emily gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest. Elaine let out a faint cry and whispered a prayer under her breath. Robert's eyes widened for a moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, as though a puzzle he had been turning in his mind finally revealed its picture. Kyle blinked, his mouth opening and closing. At last he laughed, but the sound was brittle, forced. That's ridiculous. You own this? No, you're bluffing. You couldn't possibly afford a yacht like this. Not with your house, your old car, your polo shirts from discount racks. You expect me to believe you just wrote a check? I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. I don't need you to believe it. The Coast Guard registration has my name. The marina has my account on file. The insurance policy lists me as sole owner. Every legal document says the same thing. This is my yacht. His face drained of color. He glanced at Emily, then at his parents, searching for support. None came. Robert crossed his arms, his expression carved in stone. Elaine shook her head slowly, her lips pressed together. Emily stared at me, tears brimming in her eyes, her voice barely more than a whisper. Dad, why didn't you tell us? I turned to her gently. Because I wanted this to be a gift. I wanted you to enjoy it first, to fall in love with the freedom it brings, the way your mother and I used to. Then I planned to tell you it was yours. I wanted today to be the start of new memories, a chance to heal the distance between us. Her tears spilled over, She covered her mouth with both hands, her shoulders shaking. Robert reached out to rest his hand on her arm, steady and protective. Elaine wept quietly beside him. Kyle's face twisted with something between disbelief and fury. A gift? You were going to give us this? And now you're taking it away because of one little faucet? That's insane. I met his glare without flinching. Not because of the faucet, because of what you revealed when you thought it was a rental. You showed contempt, arrogance, cruelty. You mocked me, sabotaged my property, tried to humiliate me in front of my own daughter. That is why the gift is gone. He slammed his palm against the table, making the glasses rattle. You can't just dangle something like this and then snatch it away. I kept my voice level. I can, because it is mine, and you have proven you don't deserve it. Emily looked at him then, really looked, as though she were seeing him clearly for the first time. Her face crumpled with hurt and disbelief. Kyle, he was going to give us this. He trusted us. And you... Her voice broke, and she couldn't finish. Kyle reached for her hand, but she pulled it away, pressing it against her chest. He looked at me again, his eyes wild now. You set me up. You wanted me to fail. I shook my head slowly. No, Kyle. I wanted you to succeed. I wanted you to show gratitude, to show respect, to show Emily that she chose a man of character. But you failed yourself. You revealed who you truly are. The brass compass near the helm caught the fading light, its needle steady, unwavering. I let my eyes rest on it for a moment before returning to the table. This was meant to be your inheritance, your future, your sanctuary. But tonight, you've walked away from it with your own hands. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint creak of the yacht against its moorings, the low sigh of the evening tide. I leaned back slowly, folded my arms, and allowed the silence to do what words no longer needed to. The room was still heavy with my words when I pushed the small drive back into my pocket. I looked at each face in turn. Elaine's eyes were swollen with quiet tears, Robert's jaw set in firm disapproval, Emily's lips trembling as she tried to understand what she had just heard. Kyle sat slouched in his chair, his expression twisted, his confidence unraveling thread by thread. I felt no joy in it, only the steady calm that comes when a decision has settled fully into your bones. I spoke slowly, clearly, so no one could mistake my meaning. The gift is withdrawn. This yacht will remain mine. Whatever dreams I had of handing it to you both end tonight. Some things cannot be repaired, and trust is one of them. Emily let out a sob and buried her face in her hands. Elaine reached over and rubbed her back gently, whispering words too soft for me to hear. Robert leaned closer to me, his voice measured but low. You are right to say it plainly, Thomas. Mercy without boundaries becomes weakness. He must learn that. His eyes flicked toward his son, disappointment carved so deeply it looked permanent. Kyle pushed back his chair abruptly, the legs scraping across the floor. He stood with his fists clenched at his sides, his chest rising and falling too quickly. So that's it? He demanded. You play the benevolent old man with a yacht, and then yank it away because I hurt your pride? I met his fury with calm. This isn't about pride. It's about character. A man's true nature is revealed when he thinks no one is watching, and you showed yours today. He laughed bitterly, throwing his hands into the air. You've been waiting for this. You've always hated me. Admit it. I shook my head. I wanted to believe in you. For Emily's sake, I tried. I paid for the things that mattered to her, gave you both every chance to build a life. I wanted this yacht to be the bridge that carried us forward. But you chose to burn it before it was even yours. Emily lifted her head then, her face streaked with tears. She looked at him with something more painful than anger. It was disappointment. He was going to give us this, Kyle. He trusted us. And you ruined it. Her voice cracked on the last word. She pressed her hands together in her lap and shook her head slowly. For the first time that evening, Kyle had no quick answer. His mouth opened, then closed, his eyes darting to his parents as though he might find rescue there. But Robert remained silent, his gaze hard, and Elaine only wiped her eyes. He was alone, and he knew it. I rose from my chair and walked to the window. Outside, the harbor lights had begun to glow, small points against the water, steady and sure. The tide pulled gently at the hull, leaving thin ripples that stretched behind us like lines in the wake. The world moved forward, indifferent to the storm inside the cabin. I turned back to them. I will not shame you further in front of strangers, but I will not ignore what you have done. You and Emily should gather your things and leave the yacht tonight. I wish her no harm, but I cannot welcome you here again. Emily gasped softly. Dad, please. Her voice was broken, her eyes pleading. I softened my tone when I looked at her. I love you, Emily. That will never change. But sometimes love means saying enough. Tonight is that moment. She pressed her face into her hands again, sobbing quietly. Kyle stood frozen, his fists unclenching, his shoulders slumping as if the fight had drained out of him. For once he did not argue. Perhaps he knew there was nothing left to win. Elaine reached across the table and touched my arm. Thomas, I'm so sorry. We raised him better, but somewhere along the way he lost himself. Please don't think we share his view. We see your generosity, your dignity. You did not deserve this. Her voice trembled, but her words held firm. Robert gave a slow nod, his voice steady. You have shown grace and restraint, and he has squandered it. If this is the consequence, so be it. I returned to my seat and folded my hands in my lap. My chest felt heavy, but it was not with doubt. It was with the weight of years of giving finally meeting their end. The wake behind the yacht was spreading wider now, carrying the day's lessons out into the bay. I looked once more at Kyle. His eyes were downcast, his jaw tight, but his voice never came. In that silence, I heard the truth louder than any denial. He had destroyed his own inheritance with his own hands, and now the gift was gone forever. The next morning, the harbor seemed brighter than usual, as if the sun itself wanted to remind me that life goes on no matter what storms pass through a cabin. The gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and clear, and the water lapped gently at the pilings, but I could feel it in the air, in the way people turned their heads when Kyle walked past on the dock. News travels quickly in places like Annapolis, faster than the tide, carried on whispers that cut sharper than blades. I had not said a word to anyone beyond the family, but it seemed I didn't need to. The dockmaster, Morales, stopped by the slip early, his cap tilted low over his eyes. He greeted me with the same steady respect he always had, but when Kyle approached behind me with his bag slung over his shoulder, Morales's expression shifted. He didn't scold him outright. He didn't need to. Instead, he looked him square in the eye and said, "We don't tolerate tampering with other people's property here." The words were plain, heavy, and final. Kyle's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Emily kept her head down beside him, her face pale, her movements hurried. When they finally left the marina, their steps were quick, almost stumbling. I watched them walk down the long dock toward the parking lot, Kyle's voice low and angry, his hands gesturing sharply. Emily walked silently, her shoulders rounded, her bag clutched close against her side. They looked smaller out there, diminished against the backdrop of boats that gleamed proudly in the Sunday. I felt a pang for Emily, but I let the moment pass. Choices have consequences, and sometimes watching them unfold is the only way to learn. By midday, whispers had become conversation. A couple I'd seen countless weekends stopped me to admire the yacht, their tone polite but edged with curiosity. "Heard there was a bit of a situation yesterday," the man said carefully. I simply nodded and replied, "Handled." That was all. No details, no bitterness. The less I said, the louder the truth seemed to speak. Later, Robert found me by the rail. His face was grave but calm. "I called a friend of mine who's on the marina board," he told me. "Kyle won't be welcome back here for a while." Morales made sure of it. I thanked him quietly. It wasn't revenge I sought, but accountability. The harbor had its own code of conduct, and Kyle had broken it. The ripples spread outward. Elaine came with a tray of coffee and sat beside me in the cockpit. She looked tired, her eyes softer than I had ever seen them. "We'll be limiting our visits with him for a time," she said gently. "He needs to understand what he's done, and he won't if we make excuses. You've given more than enough." Her words felt like balm on a wound. I realized then that I was not alone in seeing his true nature. They had seen it too, and they were no longer willing to cover it with polite silence. That evening I heard from Robert again. He mentioned quietly that an investment he had been planning with Kyle's consultancy would be paused. "I cannot put money into the hands of someone who behaves that way," he said simply. It wasn't anger in his tone, it was resignation. Kyle had cut his own rope, and Robert was letting him drift. As the sun sank low, I sat on deck with a glass of wine, watching the ripples stretch across the harbor. Families laughed together on nearby boats, children ran along the docks with nets and buckets, couples leaned into each other against the evening breeze. And there I was, alone but not lonely, knowing that dignity had been preserved. The public consequences were not of my making, but of Kyle's own hand. Emily did not call that night. I told myself I wouldn't expect her to. She was caught in a storm of her own making, torn between loyalty and truth. I prayed quietly that she would find her way through it, that the silence might give her time to reflect. I knew the harbor would remember what had happened here, just as surely as the water remembers every stone thrown into it. The ripples had spread. They would not return. I looked at the brass compass mounted near the helm, its needle still steady, still pointing north as the last light faded. The harbor lights flickered on one by one, guiding boats safely to their slips. I thought of Linda then, her voice echoing in my heart. "Let the tide do the work, Thomas. Truth always finds its way ashore." And in that quiet moment I felt peace settle over me like the night air. The next morning the sky was pale and glassy, the kind of dawn that carries more silence than sound. I untied the lines with Robert's steady hands beside mine, and felt the harbor grace ease away from the dock. Elaine sat in the cockpit wrapped in a shawl, her silver hair catching the early light. The bay stretched out wide before us, calm as a mirror, only a faint ripple here and there where an osprey skimmed the surface. I had wanted to feel the boat move under me without the shadow of Kyle's voice filling the air. Today, I finally could. Robert took the wheel for a while, his eyes alive with boyish wonder. He had grown up around farms, not water, and yet he guided the boat with surprising ease, smiling faintly when the wind caught the bow just right. Elaine leaned back against the cushions, her face softening as she breathed in the salt air. They looked like people at peace, people who had chosen respect over conflict. Watching them steadied me, though there was still an ache in my chest that no amount of wind could carry away. I walked the deck slowly, feeling the sun warm the wood, listening to the sails hum as they filled. The harbor shrank behind us until it was only a line of masts against the horizon. Out here, away from the murmurs and the stares, I could breathe again. The brass compass shone steady, its needle fixed north, and I felt Linda's memory close, as if she were leaning against the rail beside me. I whispered to her, "We're still moving forward." The phone rang then, its vibration against the wood sharp in the stillness. I picked it up, my heart leaping when I saw Emily's name on the screen. For a long moment I just stared, unsure whether to answer. At last I pressed it to my ear and said her name softly. Her voice was quiet, strained. "Dad." Just that one word, and I heard the weight behind it. She paused, as though unsure of what to say next. I waited. "I'm sorry," she whispered finally. "I didn't know what he was doing. I didn't know he would—" Her words trailed off. I closed my eyes, leaning against the helm. "You don't need to apologize for his choices," I told her gently, "but you do need to see them for what they are." "Oh." There was another long silence, broken only by the faint sound of her breathing. "I'm staying with Rachel for a while," she said at last. I can't go back to the apartment right now. Rachel was her sister, my eldest, the one who had always been more cautious, more watchful. I felt a measure of relief knowing Emily was with her. I need time, she continued. I need to think about what kind of life I want, about who I want to build it with. Her voice cracked, and I heard the sobs she tried to hold back. I wanted to reach through the phone, to hold her like I did when she was small and storms scared her in the night. Instead, I said softly, "Take all the time you need. Just remember who you are, Emily. Remember the girl who used to laugh on the water with me. She's still in you." She didn't answer right away. Then, in a whisper, "Dad, keep the boat in your name for now. Please, I can't accept it, not like this. Not after everything." My throat tightened. "It will stay with me," I promised. "And it will be here if you ever want to come back aboard." We said goodbye, her voice trembling, mine barely steady. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and stood for a long while staring at the horizon. The water was smooth, the sky endless, but my heart was caught between sorrow and hope. When I told Robert and Elaine later, they both nodded quietly. Elaine pressed her hand to mine and said, "She's choosing, Thomas. That's the first step." Robert only murmured, "Sometimes walking away is harder than staying, but it's the only path forward." I turned my eyes back to the water. The sails snapped gently above us, the compass needle gleamed, and the wake stretched behind like a written record of everything we had left behind. Emily's voice still echoed in my ears, her choice trembling but real. It was not the ending I had imagined, but it was a beginning all the same. When we returned to the slip that evening, the harbor was quiet, the water turning gold beneath the sinking Sunday. I secured the lines myself, taking my time with each knot, feeling the rough rope bite into my palms. The act grounded me. Robert and Elaine stood nearby, waiting without speaking, their faces calm but touched with the same heaviness that pressed on me. Once everything was settled, they excused themselves gently, saying they would see me tomorrow. I watched them walk down the dock hand in hand, their figures outlined by the fading light, and I felt a small pang of envy at their steadiness. The yacht was mine again, silent now except for the creak of its timbers. I walked the deck slowly, touching the rail as I went, letting my hand rest on the polished brass fittings. Each gleam reminded me of Linda, of the promise I had whispered when I first bought this boat. I went below and sat at the dining table, the same place where words had cut deeper than knives only a day earlier. The glasses were gone, the plates washed, yet the memory of that confrontation lingered like smoke after a fire. I took out a sheet of stationery and a pen. My hand hovered for a long moment before I began to write. The words came slowly, carefully, each one carrying more weight than ink should be able to hold. I wrote to Emily. I told her I loved her, that my door and my table would always be open, but I also told her the truth as plainly as I could. That respect was the foundation of family, that gratitude was the only soil where love could grow strong, and that if she allowed contempt to poison her marriage, then it would swallow her whole. I slipped the letter into an envelope, then placed the small drive with the footage inside as well. Not to humiliate her, not to shame, but to remind. Evidence becomes memory when the noise of denial has faded. I wanted her to carry it, not as a wound, but as a compass when doubt clouded her path. I sealed the envelope and laid it on the table, knowing I would mail it in the morning. Later, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped back on deck. The harbor lights had begun to flicker on, one by one, their reflections stretching across the darkening water. I leaned against the rail, the glass cool in my hand, and stared at the compass mounted near the helm. Its needle pointed north, unwavering, steady against the shifting world around it. I let my eyes linger there, feeling the weight of its lesson. Mercy, I thought, is not erasing what was done. Mercy is allowing someone the chance to change while still holding firm to the truth. I could not pretend the yacht had not been sabotaged, that my trust had not been mocked, that years of quiet generosity had not been treated as entitlement, but I could choose to let the consequence speak for itself. I had withdrawn the gift, but I had not closed the door. The compass needle pointed north, but how Emily chose to follow it would be up to her. The night grew cooler, the breeze carrying the faint sound of laughter from another boat down the dock. I thought of Kyle then, walking away with anger twisting in his voice, blind to what he had lost. Men like him always land somewhere, always find another stage. But the damage he had done here would not be erased by charm or excuses. He had written his own story in scratches across chrome, in laughter that carried cruelty, in a faucet broken not by accident but by spite. I sipped the wine and let the peace of the evening settle into me. For the first time in many years, I felt no need to fix what someone else had broken. The yacht was whole, the compass steady, the harbor calm. Emily's path was hers to choose now. I had given her all I could. Years of support, one last gift nearly placed in her hands, and now the truth laid bare. The rest belonged to her. I stayed on deck until the stars emerged one by one, sharp and bright in the clear sky. I thought of Linda then, her voice like a whisper against the wind. "Stay your course, Thomas. True north never falters." I placed my hand on the brass compass, the metal cool beneath my palm, and nodded softly. The future was uncertain, the family fractured, but the direction was clear. I finished the wine, set the glass aside, and let the night carry me forward. The wake we leave behind cannot be erased, but the helm is still in our hands. And as long as the compass points north, there is always a chance, however fragile, for the tide to bring us home. When the sun set over the harbor, I felt a peace I had not known in years. The yacht remained mine, the gift withdrawn, but the true lesson was already written. Respect cannot be bought, gratitude cannot be forced, and arrogance always costs more than money. Kyle lost an inheritance with his own hands, and Emily now stands at a crossroads only she can choose. For me, the compass points north, steady and unwavering. What would you have done in my place? Would you have given mercy or taken back everything? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.